what does spirituality and spiritual insight mean and look like in a setting that is not a religious or faith-oriented setting. Young people have been a part of, my focus for decades. I'm so optimistic about their potential, and I feel that if they're just given the right tools, if they're given the right opportunities, if they're given the freedom to be able to do what they need to do in this world, with spirituality at the center of that, facilitating all of those things, I think that's where our hope lies.
Before we jump into this episode, I'd love to invite you to join this candid spiritual community to hear more conversations that will help you become happier, healthier, and more healed. All I want you to do is click on that subscribe button because I love your support. I love seeing all the comments pouring through, all the love pouring through, and we're just getting started. I can't wait to go on this journey with you, whether you're a spiritual seeker or you're just curious about the topic. And we really hope that our conversations will provide you food for thought and inspiration for your own spiritual journey. So join us for honest, candid discussions about spirituality for soul's sake.
For soul's sake, for soul's sake.
Today is a really interesting conversation. It's being held with an author, the founder and CEO of the Avanti Schools Trust, the first state-funded Hindu school in the UK, which is broadening its horizons all over the world. And I'm just deeply honored and privileged to be sat opposite Mr. Nitesh Gor. Thank you so much for being here.
Right, go. Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it.
Here.
Thanks for your time. I want to get stuck in on all things schools and all things education because I think it's such an interesting angle to add spirituality into education. And just, where did it start? What was the reason? What was the inspiration? Were you always thinking that education was going to be the place in which you used to trade yourself?
Far from it. So the start was probably a slightly selfish motive.
Really?
So in 2003, my eldest was born. And, when you have children, you start thinking about education. And one of the things that I was thinking about really was, what type of school environment, what kind of childhood I want them to have. Right?
Wow.
So what are the key things that I want them to be surrounded by and influenced by? And for me, by that time in my life, spirituality had already become a key part of that. And I was thinking about where is that type or form of education which has spirituality at its core and not necessarily in an institutionalized, religious, isolated way, but in a truly open and spiritual way. And that's not to say that there aren't other schools attempting to do that. It's just that what I found was lacking in the system. And so I thought it would be relatively straightforward to set up a school. I found out much later. I'm still finding out much later. It's a lot harder than it looks. But yeah, that's essentially, that's where it started from.
Did you envision it always being as grand as it was, or did you think, no, it's just going to be a small classroom that I'm going to bring my child up in? And
so again, things really just took their own direction. So initially, when I was thinking about school, obviously our reference points for education and even things like parenting and all, they're our own experience, right? So we think back and everyone's an expert on parenting because we were children. So my first thinking was just around how difficult can it be to build a school, and
right.
kind of, it turned out that actually we were really fortunate with our first one because we got a greenfield site at the time.
What does that mean?
So there were playing fields before, and they were not really used, so or minimally used,
okay.
And so we could enhance the site. We could create the design ourselves. So we had an incredible time with children actually designing the school. And what was really interesting was, and this just gives you an insight into how children have such a close connection with spirituality if they're allowed to.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were talking to the kids about what would their ideal school be like, and these are 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, and they were talking about having the shrine or the spiritual center visible from all aspects, all the classrooms.
Wow.
And it being in the heart of the school. And that became our principal design format for the school. So we have the shrine in the middle, and from every classroom you can literally see the shrine. So, and it turned, we got we got many awards for that first building, including the Telegraph's top 10 buildings in Europe.
Wow.
And that's not just school buildings, but any building in that year. So, yeah, it was a great journey.
2005, you secured the funding for the
Yeah.
schools, and we're now, 2024?
Mm.
So we're well down the line, almost 20 years since then.
Yeah.
I mean, what have you learned about children adopting spirituality? I mean, we can talk about what we learn about children. That's a whole talk by itself.
Yeah.
But children adopting spirituality, is it natural? Because I think in the modern day, people think that spirituality is more subjective and something that you learn through life experiences, whereas from what I understand of the Avanti schools, it's very much that it's yes, it's innately there, and experiences bring it out, but also that there needs to be a structured learning around spirituality. And so maybe some lessons that you've learned about kids adopting spirituality in schools.
Yeah.
The challenges even.
And to your point, like just there's this one sense about adopting in terms of taking it up, but you mentioned this point about actually it being internal, and as we say often, like educare, like the root word for education is this idea of drawing out what's already within, right? So like that's a principle of education. It's a fundamental kind of view on education.
Even in the secular sense.
Yeah. So the word education itself is coming from educare. So like the idea of spirituality in that sense is extremely kind of matched with education. The
Right.
whole notion of discovering oneself and allowing that to come forth. And that's that's the beautiful aspect of education. That's why I feel so. Initially, I didn't, because my journey through education was a interesting story. Maybe
That's not on the bio.
yeah, it's not on the bio. Yeah, dropping out of med school and stuff. So like but the setting of an educational institution, the power of an educational institution to be able to facilitate a child's exploration of themselves, a child's flourishing in terms of who they are, and obviously at a profound level, as opposed to the kind of superficial layers of identity that we have, and then being able to take that and impact the world as a consequence of that. That I think is just, I mean, what could be more exciting than that? And I think that with children and young people in education, they have less inhibitions about that, particularly generally. I'm saying, obviously it's a generalization, but there are opportunities to be able to turn their mind towards that at an early stage, where habits can be formed, to your point about adopting it, and what does that look like in practice. That habits can be formed, that values can be formed around actually what's important in my life, what do I value really, and what am I going to direct my life towards. All of these types of things, they can come, obviously they can come as we grow older and into our adult life. But if those habits, and we know, right, like those habits, those, in Sanskrit we call them samskaras, this kind of impressions, if those impressions are built in early on, it's so much easier for them to then relate to that, to then, if you're going through a rough patch, what do you turn to?
Right.
So like, and if you've practiced meditation, you've practiced yoga, you've practiced spirituality from 4 years up, which is what we do in our schools, then maybe you'll turn to that as opposed to some other stuff which is not so helpful.
Have you seen that happen? Like, for example, you started with your son, and he's gone through the process, gone through the journey. I mean, speaking from the father's perspective, do you notice that your son is now in the moments of harsh realities of life? Is he turning towards that internal space?
Yeah, it's a good question. So he was part of that first cohort who started in our first school in 2008. So they were the first group that actually graduated, who went from reception year, age 4, and graduated age 18 from year 13 in our secondary school. So that we actually did a mini film on that cohort, because what we wanted to see was what was it like for that group, because
starting
they were
from the beginning.
Yeah, starting from what is, because that's the system that they've known, the Avanti education system. And and going through those experiences, and it is very fair to say that that group was definitely a guinea pig set, right? Like, so we as me personally, but also several of us involved at the time, we didn't have a clue about education at the time. So we were learning as we went. Fortunately for us, we had some fantastic educationalists around us who made who made it what it is. But yeah, does he turn to it now? I think that whole cohort turns to it, and I think it really shines through in the interviews that we did with them, and that's on YouTube, and this idea of what did you gain from an Avanti education that really helps you in your life today.
Wow.
And they talk about these things. They talk about the spirituality. They talk about the values that they've really inculcated and try to practice. They talk about their reference points in terms of our view, our world view, like what do we, how do we want to engage with the world? So all of these things are foundational. We take it sometimes for granted that it's kind of generic and completely objective, but it's not. I mean, it's very personal, a lot of these things. And we can build upon it.
That's a really interesting point that you mentioned, that it's really personal, because I think oftentimes we think of schools as being machines where you bring out the same result each time. Because, as a parent, I'm looking at schools based on the results which they bring the child at the end of the and they all have to come out straight A students, and they all have to be incredibly, morally and ethically well stabilized and situated. And I think that that's really interesting that you've talked about spirituality as being something that's innately there, and that through a system of education we can get our youth, our children, to understand that that's something that they can turn to, and then more so that it's still personal, that it's not uniform and it's not robotic, and spirituality is not about being in the box per se, but that it can be whatever it looks like externally, but it's still a very personal thing.
No, absolutely. This is a really exciting and intriguing space for me, as we explore this concept of what do we mean when we say spiritual, because it's a word that gets used a lot, right? So we use it in so many different contexts, and we use it almost sometimes unthinkingly. But what do we actually mean? And this was a challenge that was presented in Avanti to us when we looked beyond the Hindu faith schools to look at the wider education system and our involvement with that. So now we do have 5 schools of the 12 that are in Avanti that are not faith schools.
Oh.
Right. So they're community schools, but they share the same ethos. So they still share the ethos of having spiritual insight at the core of our offer. So when we were exploring that, you can imagine the questions that were coming up for us is that, okay, well, that's all well and good in theory, but what does it actually mean? What does spirituality and spiritual insight mean and look like in a setting that is not a religious or faith-oriented setting? And I think the point that you picked out there about it being personal is at the core of our response or our answer to that, which is that there is an understanding around, like, whether we call it consciousness or spirituality, however we want to identify the most fundamental nature of myself, right? At a most fundamental level, my identity. And that having equivalence in terms of all living beings, like a sense of deep equality at a spiritual level, because you can't, I mean, just a side point, you can't get equality at material level, right? That's just, it's impossible. But you can get it at a spiritual level. So we talk a lot of the world's talking a lot about equality. They can't get there if you just want to talk about it from a physical perspective.
Why not?
Because you can't have two things which are equivalent, right? So if you're just talking about the physical aspect of oneself, if we don't think about anything beyond the physical in a very reductive sense,
right?
What is exactly the same? I mean,
even twins,
right? My left hand and my right hand are not the same.
Right.
What to speak about me and you,
right?
So if we want to get to real equality, we have to start thinking about the spiritual dimension of it. And so therefore, when this translates into a community saying, now all of a sudden it becomes super exciting, because actually we can start to engage in a lot of social, ethical, whatever dialogue issues that are going on in the world from a new perspective, and inform a conversation that's not boxed, like you said, not boxed in a religious kind of setting, to kind of say, we can speak from a spiritual perspective in a secular setting.
Yeah.
And that's doable.
Wow. It's one of the things that people most worry about when they come into spiritual circles, like seeing the world from the perspective of what I share, kirtan and bhakti.
Yeah, exactly.
It's something that people fear the most, is being converted to something that's uniform, that makes everyone look the same, talk the same, eat the same. And I didn't quite understand that fear initially, because I felt like it was kind of nice to be part of a community that did all those things in a uniform way. But now I get that we're all people who are different and personal in different ways. Then our relationship with God is also going to be personal. And I think that the danger, though, with that is that we end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater as well, by going, fine, look, we're not focusing on conversion, but then let's also be loose with our practices as well. There's no discipline attached to that. There's no uniformity there, and there's no structure there. And that's the kind of danger of, both sides of the coin. So I don't know whether I'm left or right here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, you must experience it a lot, just in terms of the way that, you know, you're kind of sharing spirituality with the wider world, right? So but, you know, that's the nature of truth. Like, it's true for everything. It's not just true for spirituality, and it's not just a one size fits all anywhere. And you can always take that to its extreme, which is a free-for-all state. But we don't do that with anything else. Why would we do it with spirituality? And I think that's the point about getting specific and really clear about what do we mean by it, because then it doesn't become a free-for-all, which can be abused, right? And has been abused.
Right.
And in the same way that it has in religious institutions. So there's an interplay there, but I think that space of exploration about what does that look like, what does it mean for you, and what does it mean, and having that dialogue is actually where you get a broader perspective on something, right? So that's the exciting space, I think.
Right. There's this one, I can't remember who I heard it from, but there's this one spiritualist that I heard speaking about the difference between principle and detail.
Yeah.
And how the detail can be different according to the time, place, and circumstance. Like, you can dress a certain way based on the time, place, and circumstance. Like, for example, in India, I do wear Indian clothing. Like, I'll wear a robe, what looks like a robe, and when people look at me, they're like, "Why are you wearing a skirt?" And it's just it's the cultural way of things that are done in India. But it doesn't mean I dress like that all the time here. And so dress is something that I'm always experimenting with. But I think the principle is clear, that one dresses according to the way in which maybe spirituality can be more inculcated in the mind and the consciousness. And the same with food. Like, it's not that I have to eat Indian food every single day to be considered spiritual. But there's also a principle behind that of, like, for example, in the Bhakti tradition, it's all about what does God like to eat. Now, this is getting esoteric, but imagine if God likes to eat a certain type of food, then surely if one cooks that same food and eats only according to what God is going to accept in his kindness and love, then one eats accordingly that diet. And so I'm still experimenting with it, because I also think God must like lasagna, and he must like pizza.
Why would he not?
Why would he not? You know, so it's a whole interplay between principle and detail, and like you said, treading that line and knowing, you know, how far do you want to go as a person in that.
But and you know, like, to your example about clothes, right? Because I think that's an interesting one.
Right.
But so there's also a functional aspect there, right? So you wear different clothes for, you know, you don't wear the same clothes going to work as you do when you go to a swimming pool, right? So there's a functional aspect. And so even when we talk about how it may make us enter a more spiritual state, what are the material things around us that may enter a more spiritual state? Like, I can tell you, if you're in a UK climate in the middle of winter versus India in the middle of summer, like that, I can bet you, regardless of what style dress you wear, the effect on your body temperature is going to be much more impactful on your state of meditation than whether you've tied your cloth this way or that way, right? So, like, I think and sometimes we miss that. Like, it becomes clearer also when you think about a place like India, which has got such diverse climates, diverse language, diverse diets, right? And they're not all doing the same thing. Like, so why are they not? If there's an ideal in that sense, why are they not? Why is everyone not doing the same thing? Why is the architecture of all the temples in South India
Slightly
not the
different.
same as in all,
Right.
you know? Like, why is it all? So, and you know, you when you mentioned this point about community, that you were trying to kind of see like the motivation for why people might come to spirituality. It reminded me of this point that Krishna makes in the Gita, which is that actually people come to spirituality for different reasons, right? And that's okay, because we're all coming for, like, so some people are coming because they are really stressed out. They're in a bad place in their life. They need something that they can rely on, that they can turn to, right? Some people don't need that. Like, some people are coming because they're actually just curious. They want to know something because it's a philosophical inquiry or whatever it might be. There's a range of that. And I think that the way that we display or offer spirituality has always been, and it's there right in the Gita as well when Krishna's speaking about it, has always been diverse. It's always included a real deep sense of diversity to be able to accommodate somebody where they are at, right? It's not about saying, here's the ideal to be superimposed upon you and you must rise. It's about saying, where are you at? This is the level at which this is the level at you can access spirituality, and that's true for everyone. So there's an unlimited range of ways that you can do that.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess it takes a mature person to first realize that, and to then try and give that to others and encourage others to be of that nature as well. And it's something that I'm really respectful and grateful that you've kind of gifted. I mean, we've known each other for a while, and I think that one thing I really appreciate about you is that you've always been authentically true to the way that you practice, without inculcating that this is the only way. You know, being dominating that this is the only way that one can practice. And I think I really love that about you. You've turned the chapter from CEO to now being more of an orator of spirituality, speaking about Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita and Bhakti. Eastern spirituality is becoming your topic of choice. I wanted to know why. What I mean, most people would get to CEO level and go, I'm happy, I'm content, I've done it. Like, let me just retire and go to the Bahamas and, you know, I don't know.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, I am still CEO for another year and a bit.
Yeah.
But the reason why I deliberately took that route, one was, I guess the underlying reason was, whilst we've come a long way in Avanti, I still feel we have a long way to go. So we've come a long way in terms of, you know, we've set up the system, we've got 12 schools, we've, you know, our standards are great. We've introduced a new way of thinking about education in terms of within our schools about spirituality and character and educational excellence combined as a holistic form of education. But I always feel, and maybe that's just, maybe it will always be like that, and maybe it should always be like this, is that there's still more to do. And I feel that introducing and bringing alive, and when we talk about alive, I don't just mean in, like, you know, you've got the policies and you've got the curriculum and all of that stuff, but actually in the moment-to-moment interactions of every child with every adult, with every child, etc., that this is really coming alive in terms of their experience of spirituality. Now, that's a huge and mammoth task, and it will go way beyond me and my involvement, but I felt like it needed that concentrated focus. And so that's what I want to do, and that's where I'll be shifting my attention within Avanti, is to actually help bring that alive.
The spiritual focus.
Yeah.
And I know that you're writing more. Your book, Before Religion, is coming out soon. Tell us about that and what inspired that.
Yeah, okay. So Before Religion, you see a theme here. What's become really important to me is the articulation and promotion of this notion of universal spirituality beyond sectarian boundaries. That, for me, is a really big thing. And I think, and I'm convinced that the the Vedic or the tradition from the Bhagavatam and the Gita have something very profound to offer in this regard. So during lockdown,
Well, we had lots of time.
yeah, where we had some time. So I was essentially just I was reading a lot and I was making notes, and those notes turned into basically I was honing in on this aspect about what are our scriptures speaking about when they speak about non-sectarian spirituality. So I was compiling those notes, and it essentially turned into 100,000 words, close to, and then when I started formulating that together, it just turned essentially into what became a book called Before Religion, and it sets out. So the Srimad Bhagavatam, which I'm sure most of your viewers are familiar with, but
Maybe if they haven't, drop us what is it?
yeah, okay. So the Srimad Bhagavatam, otherwise known as the Bhagavad Purana, is one of the 18 Puranas of the Vedic literature. It's essentially approximately 18,000 verses, and it picks up from where the Bhagavad Gita leaves off. So the Bhagavad Gita is a very short book in the sense that it's only 700 verses. And where that leaves off, the Srimad Bhagavatam goes into detail with stories and examples and furthering and deepening that philosophy. And so in the Srimad Bhagavatam are 4 seed verses which Krishna speaks. And those, when I was reading those 4 seed verses, it really struck me that within these 4 seed verses is almost like a story about how spirituality can be experienced and understood in a completely non-sectarian way. And so what I've tried to do is explode those 4 seed verses out into a hopefully a systematic approach to how the philosophy brings this to life.
With trying to make it non-sectarian, I mean, this is, I don't know if I'm challenging in the right way here, but let's see where it goes. With trying to make something non-sectarian, but still also applying this is a way in which you can still live, does that not also then become sectarian?
This is a way in which you can still live? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, as in like you're saying, okay, we're breaking the boundaries down, sectarian spirit, which means that this silo, that silo of spirituality, we're breaking those barriers down, but then offering a new one.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I'm definitely not become a religious leader in the sense of starting a new religion, but no. So yeah, the idea being that the idea is to find the commonality. So it's not for everyone to become the same, but it is to identify the sameness. Right? There's a difference there, right? So it's about saying, okay, what are the things that we do see that we can see from the perspective of spirituality that are true for me and true for you, and that could be about the human condition, it could be about the nature of identity, it could be our nature of our journey of exploring that, our contribution to a greater purpose, etc. It could be many of these things, and I feel that the Vedic perspective on it was always like that. So sometimes when people think about Hinduism, they think about this monolithic type of religion because that's what they're used to in the forms of Abrahamic religions, which are essentially, I mean, even they are not in that sense. But Hinduism is even further kind of diverse than that, in the sense that, as we know, Hinduism, the word Hindu doesn't kind of feature in the ancient texts. It was an imposed word. But that civilization accommodated for the complete diversity of human motive, human state, human condition, whatever it might be, and facilitated that in a cohesive civilization, all progressively moving upwards in their spiritual journey. Now, how did they do that? Like, what was the framework that ties people together who don't have or don't worship the same deity, who don't necessarily have the same belief system in terms of the kind of the motivations for taking up spirituality, the same practices in terms of what mantra they chant or whether they chant a mantra. All of these things were completely diverse in that civilization that we now refer to as kind of Hinduism in the ancient time. So what does that civilization have to teach us about what we could learn about in our multicultural, globalized world? what could we adopt from those practices and those viewpoints that could actually give us a way of speaking about this without becoming either just dysfunctional or confrontational or defensive or, bringing up our sectarian boundaries again and just tolerating each other as opposed to accepting each other, right? So
fascinating. Before Religion, get your copy now. When it comes to this unity and diversity, which I think is kind of the underlying theme of this conversation, where we talk about breaking down sectarian boundaries, recognizing there's so much similarity. There's a unity and diversity theme going on here. Yeah. There is a common belief, and we're from the same spiritual background, so we can definitely discuss this. There's a common belief that everything is one. This is when you break down all the boundaries, you get to the singular spirit of everything is one. And it's something that I disagree with, and I'm very open about it, because I can understand the appeal. I can understand why yogis and why spiritualists can be attracted by that, because it does, like we said, break down the boundaries and help us to see the unity. But I think that there has to be a spirit of recognizing the difference. And I wanted to understand from a philosophical perspective what the Bhagavad Gita, what the Bhagavatam, or any scriptural evidence talks about. Yes, there is unity, but there's also this diversity.
Yeah, I actually feel that the principle here is an amazing contribution of the Vedic tradition about reconciling this oneness and difference. So, one of my favorite texts in the Bhagavatam uses this word called advayam, and advayam means non-dual. So it speaks about how the absolute truth or the ultimate reality can be experienced in 3 different phases. That non-dual thing can be experienced in a diverse form. Now, that sometimes can be a little bit confusing. That how is that possible? Yeah. And I want to give you 2 examples. So, one example is this story which actually you'll see on the cover of Before Religion, is essentially this outline almost, which is not quite clear, but as you look at it closer, it becomes evident it's an elephant. So this notion of the elephant emerges, and it's based on the ancient Indian tale, which is about how a group of blind men touching different parts of the elephant, and they're all coming up with different ideas of what this might be, right? So somebody thinks it's a spear, somebody thinks it's a tree, somebody thinks it's a wall, a fan, etc., etc. And they think that what they're experiencing is everything. They think that's the entirety of reality. So when, if you're touching the trunk and you think it's a snake or whatever you think it is, and I'm touching the leg and I think it's a tree. Now, if we're speaking to each other, now if what I think is it's just the tree, now you're not going to be able to relate to that. You're gonna reject that out of hand, because you're kind of like, it's very self-evident to you that it's more like a snake, because
I've not seen it like
that's your experience, right? So when we think about just the one or the difference, you've heard me say this before, right? Like we can get into this habit of kind of mutual exclusivity, that it has to be this or that. And the Vedic tradition comes in and say it doesn't have to be this or that. It can be this and that, right? And that's one of the really interesting contributions of the Vedic. It's such a simple point, but it's so missed, and it's missed because our Western way of thinking about stuff, based on Western philosophy, is
black and white.
Put it in its boxes. That's how logic is built, right? And I want to just give you one other example. And this comes, like, this notion of oneness, absolute oneness, without any differentiation, which is what I think you're, referring to here when you have this hesitation against that idea. There's something that doesn't quite feel right there. I sometimes do this with, with groups. When you're sitting in a room and you see the sun pouring through the window, and we say, it's sunshine, right? Like, so when you see those rays of sun, like, what is that ray? Is it the sun or is it not the sun? So if I force you into a decision, is it the sun or is it not the sun? Forcing you, is it or is it not? Like, what are you going to say to that? It is and it is not,
Right.
right? At the same time. At the same time, it can be and it cannot be. And that point, and in the Vedic tradition, this is articulated as achinta bheda bheda tattva, which is that simultaneously, it can be one and different, right? So we don't have to be forced. We don't have to create these false dichotomies that we force ourselves into and other people into. And I think that's a beautiful contribution of the Vedic tradition.
100%. It's something that we speak about a lot on my retreats and a lot on gatherings where we do speak philosophy, is this idea that God is impersonal through this energy that we see,
Right.
the energy of the world. He's also personal. He's closer and nearer than near, seated within the heart.
Right.
But he's also a person.
Right.
And the combination of these three is a holistic way of seeing God, as opposed to seeing it from one narrow lens or the other narrow lens. And I think we spend so much time arguing about it needs to be this or this. And I love how you say it. Why can it not be this and this? And I think that approach of seeing the divine, seeing the absolute truth as being not one or the other, but a holistic approach. It helps us to appreciate each other's God.
Yeah.
You know, I've understood that one who goes into a spiritual place can recognize God, even if it's not in the way that you're
Right.
personally worshipping.
Right.
And I think it would just work wonders in the world of spirituality, in the world of wellness, if we saw each other as more. Yes, we're still on this, on a path. We're on a path, but recognizing that that there's more to the truth than what we currently know. And even if I know all these things, even if I know God is impersonal, is seated within the heart, he's also a person, even then, not closing my mind to going that's all that there is. There's so much more to that aspect, so much more to the personal truth than even I can understand just by my puny brain. And so I guess there's a requirement for humility in spirituality.
Yeah, that's a really nice point. This idea of the role of humility.
Right.
Yeah, no, I really like that, because I think if you want to learn anything, you have to have some humility. You have to appreciate that I already don't know this thing, because if I already know it, why would I learn it? So at a base level, there has to be whatever we're journeying into.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And humility, I think people often get it wrong as being like downtrodden, and
Right.
Humility doesn't mean to think less of yourself.
Yeah.
It just means to think about yourself less, which
Yeah,
means that you're not so
exactly.
self-absorbed in thinking you know everything all the time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this has been a really great conversation. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, likewise.
Can we do some quick fire round? Are you into?
I hate it. Actually, I'm an extreme introvert, so this quite anyway. Yeah, you can try.
I mean, it's like I call them quick fire, but they're super medium fire. To be honest,
okay.
they're more. What's something you're curious about right now in your life?
This is what I mean. So, like, let me just explain something
Give
to
us
you,
some
right?
context. Yeah.
So, introverted people like me,
Yeah.
we think something through in our heads, like really a lot,
Yeah.
before we feel comfortable sharing it.
Yeah. It's a real thought as opposed
So, like,
to off the cuff.
yeah, exactly. So when you say to me, what am I curious about right now? I'm like going through a list of things in my mind.
Right.
Like trying to think, okay, what should I talk about here?
Give us the top three
Okay,
then.
all right. Not even top three. I'll give you a random one.
Yeah, go on. Then.
So I'm curious about how we as a society will deal with the challenges of that, particularly our younger generations are coming into at this point in time. Now, there's always been challenges all the time, and every generation has its challenges. But we're getting to a place where I think it's fair to say that there are some pretty unique ones out there right now. And whether that's kind of social media informed, technology informed, globalization informed, existential stuff like the environmental crisis, etc. So all of these, how we are going to these generations coming through, how are they going to respond to that? And the reason why I'm curious about it mostly is because I feel like spirituality has a response and an answer and a place and a indispensable role in being able to make sure that their response is a happy one.
I mean, it's worth doing the quick fire round just for that answer. I totally agree. Something that you're personally working through at the moment.
Yeah, okay. So for me personally, I'm working through getting myself a bit more in terms of my own health, physical health, because I found that I'm 49 now, just turned
Whoa.
49. So I'm feeling it more in terms of the necessity. I think, well, my experience was, in my teens and 20s and almost 30s, but in my 40s, I started feeling a bit that actually maybe I should pay a bit of attention here. What am I eating? Am I exercising? All of those things, which, to be honest, when you've got busy stuff to do at work, or when we are also have a focus on spirituality, sometimes we can ignore other aspects.
Yeah,
and I think
100%.
that's become true.
I mean, I'm sitting in that boat right now. One of the things that my spiritual teacher tells me all the time, in fact, above and beyond some of the lessons that he gives me, is I should lose weight and I should really focus on that. Yeah, and it's I mean, you'd expect that your spiritual teacher will give you things from, and he does. He does give me insights from the scripture and how to perfect my relationship with God. Of course, that's there, but he does comment on it, and it kind of makes me think. See, the thing is, I'm in a place where I'm not experiencing bad health right now, touch wood, but I know it's going to creep up on me.
Yeah.
And so it's something that's in my mind. I know I need to do something about it. And so you just affirming that for me right now, maybe it's another voice I need to add to my head.
Yeah. And so I think it's a wise approach, right?
Yeah.
Just try and preempt it.
To preempt it.
Yeah.
To know, maybe one less pizza slice will be the solution for now. In short, what legacy would you like to leave behind?
Oh, wow. Legacy. That's a tough one, but I would say maybe, okay. So I think legacy for me probably would be in being able to influence young people so that they value and can access their version of spiritual life. And I think that that's, young people have been a part of, my focus for decades. And I'm so optimistic about their potential.
Wow.
And I feel that if they're just given the right tools, if they're given the right opportunities, if they've given the freedom to be able to do what they need to do in this world, with spirituality at the center of that, facilitating all of those things, I think that's where our hope lies. So my, whatever small contribution I can make to making that happen in some small way, that would be legacy more than enough.
Yeah, it makes me feel safe for my kids in the world. At least there's someone thinking about it, and the world has a place for spirituality in the life of youthful people. So I'm grateful. Thank you. 2 more. Question number 4. Something you used to deeply value in your life, but don't value as much anymore.
Oh, used to deeply value money. So I don't mean money, so I still value money because money makes the world go round.
Don't want to manifest no money.
So and we're still looking for sponsors. But I think personal acquisition of wealth when I was younger was a big thing for me. Like it was quite high on my agenda. Never top, but very substantially there. And I always thought it would give me the things that I want, or I guess it's a generic kind of feeling that that's our route to happiness, right?
Yeah.
So, and to freedom, happiness and freedom. And I think to a certain extent it is. Like it's undeniable that to a certain extent, if you don't have a certain level of wealth, I mean, try that for a little while and you'll quickly find that you do need it. So, but I feel that through the different things I've done in my life, that I've got enough. I've got enough, and I don't need to. And actually, that added chase is just not fulfilling.
Yeah.
And so it's gone way down for me in terms of the personal acquisition. Though we're still collecting millions and millions for good causes.
Yeah.
And that will go on.
Personal acquisition of wealth. For sure. And last question. If you could create one law.
Okay.
That everyone had to live by.
Oh my God.
There we go. What would it be?
Maybe it would be something along the lines of, before you make your mind up about something, consider the possibility that you're wrong. And I think that, or even if you're not wrong, that you don't see the full picture. Yeah, I think that's. I think everyone should do that.
Speaks so much about the theme of universal truth.
Yeah.
Before you make up your mind, take the opportunity to consider you're wrong. I love that.
Yeah, or at least you're not seeing the whole picture.
Right.
So you might not be wrong in the sense that, okay, it does feel like a snake, but there may also be a part of this that feels like a tree.
Right.
Right. So I may not see the whole picture. So I might, it doesn't mean that I have to be wrong for you to be right, and vice versa. We can both be right.
We can both be right. Wow. Incredible. This has been a great episode. Really enjoyed this. Thanks,
Yeah,
Nitesh.
me too.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Really.
Thank you. If you've enjoyed this conversation, you know what to do. Drop it a like, drop it a comment, share it with a friend, throw it down the road and give it to someone that really needs it, and that will help them transform their consciousness in some way, shape or form. And definitely check out the book. By the time this episode airs, it'll be out.
Mm-hmm.
So
For sure.
Please do check out the book, Before Religion. It'll be a crack of a read. I'll definitely get a copy. I'll get a signed copy, hopefully, myself. And yeah, let me know what you think about it. Drop us some thoughts. I cannot wait to see you again on another episode of For Soul's Sake. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you. See you again soon. Namaste. If you love this podcast, you'll love my interview with Shivani Powell on the importance of accepting and embracing others without judgment. Check it out.
With a knife, you can kill someone. You can hurt someone. You can harm someone. You can also use that knife to chop fruits and vegetables to eat. And also, you can use that knife by a surgeon to save someone's life.
Yeah.
And so with money, it's not a bad thing. It depends how you use it
Yeah.
and how you show it.
Yeah. Totally.
And I think that there's also, we shouldn't pass judgment on people who choose to live in a big house, or who choose to buy nice things, or to choose to go out, because at the end of the day, I think we believe that if you're a monk, if you're spiritual, if you're this, if you're a woman, you're a man, this is the life you should lead.